Well, welcome in, students. I am just absolutely thrilled you're joining me today for this deep dive explainer of Genesis chapter 33. This text reads like a massive, deep breath of fresh air after a very long, very exhausting run of fear. We're going to adopt a strict, literal, grammatical, and historical framework today to really unpack this profound moment of reconciliation at Shechem. Just think about where we find our patriarch as this chapter opens up. Jacob steps into the morning light with a physical limp from wrestling with God. He's got a brand new name, Israel, and he's facing the looming, terrifying shadow of his brother Esau on the horizon. So grab your notebooks, get focused, and let's explore together how God majestically works through human humility to secure his divine promises.
Right off the bat, to properly orient ourselves, we need to establish exactly where we are in the biblical timeline. We are squarely within the dispensation of promise. This is the patriarchal era, moving sequentially from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob and ultimately to the 12 tribes. By looking at this through our literal, grammatical, historical lens, we recognize that God is dealing with a very specific family line to fulfill earthly, territorial promises based on an unconditional covenant. Now, grasping this dispensational context is absolutely crucial for our study. It helps us understand why Jacob's physical movements in this chapter, literally where he pitches his tent and buys his land, hold such immense theological weight for the future nation of Israel.
Okay, here's our agenda for today's study. 1. Historical and cultural background. 2. Biblical narrative. 3. Theological significance. 4. Spiritual lessons and application. And finally, 5. Conclusion.
Section 1. Historical and cultural background.
Let's consider the heavy cultural weight behind Jacob's actions as the chapter opens. Genesis 33 tells us Jacob bowed to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Now, in the ancient Near East, this wasn't just a simple, polite nod. Actually, it was a highly formalized public grammar. Bowing 7 times before a superior reflected the absolute utmost deference. It was a diplomatic maneuver used by ancient envoys to acknowledge rank and signal a deep, peaceful intent when mere words just couldn't soothe old wounds. Furthermore, look at Jacob's positioning here. He deliberately moves to the very front of his caravan. He totally reverses the expected caution of a wealthy chieftain who would normally hide safely behind his dependents. Instead, he uses this very public, physical posture of complete vulnerability to communicate profound respect, submission, and total personal responsibility for his past actions.
Moving slightly ahead, we see how deeply tied this historical context is to God's literal promises. Later in the chapter, Jacob purchases a plot of ground at Shechem from the sons of Hamor for exactly 100 pieces of silver. Historically speaking, this wasn't just about finding a convenient place to camp for the season. Not at all. This transaction functioned as a permanent, legal footprint in the land of Canaan. Just like his grandfather Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah to bury Sarah, Jacob is establishing a recognized, completely uncontested legal claim to the soil. He is operating in pure faith. And what does he do next? He sets up an altar and names it Elohe Israel, meaning God, the God of Israel. He is taking the God who promised the land and anchoring him directly to the God who is publicly honored upon it, cementing a historic testimony for generations to come.
Section 2. Biblical narrative.
As we map this chronologically, we arrive at what is really the emotional peak of the text. Read this wonderful verse with me. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him. And they wept. Genesis 33:4 NIV. Wow. The moment of impact completely reverses all strategic expectation. Think about it. Jacob had spent the entire night preparing for either bloody war or lifelong servitude, but the scene rings purely of mercy. Decades of fear, of flight, of a clenched jaw, they all just dissolve in an instant into a reunion that feels like rain on dry ground. It's an astonishing display of God miraculously softening a hardened heart before Jacob even spoke a single word of apology.
So, following this tearful embrace, we get the formal family introductions. The servants, Leah, Rachel, and all their children step forward, bowing in these successive waves of humility. And when Esau asks about the massive droves of livestock he bumped into earlier on the road, Jacob insists that Esau accept them. Notice how beautifully Jacob reframes his entire caravan here. The women, the children, the immense flocks. He doesn't frame them as the spoils of his own clever conquest or deceit, but entirely as gifts of God's grace. In this ancient culture, accepting a significant gift definitively sealed a reconciliation. Jacob's gifts travel like a bridge between estranged parties. He's not trying to purchase forgiveness. Rather, he celebrates it by putting their painful past squarely under the cover of immense, concrete kindness.
Now, look at the fascinating geographical contrast unfolding here. Esau generously offers an armed escort so they can travel together, but Jacob politely declines. He points out the extreme fragility of his nursing flocks and young children. So Esau returns that very day southward to Seir, the rocky country of Edom. Meanwhile, Jacob moves cautiously in the complete opposite direction to Sukkos to build shelters, and then he crosses safely into Shechem in the land of Canaan. While profound interpersonal peace has been made, their physical separation visualizes a massive biblical reality. Jacob and Esau are now diverging toward entirely different lands and entirely different divine callings, officially fulfilling the prophecy given to Rebekah before they were even born.
Section 3. Theological Significance. Okay, to systematically categorize the immense theological weights of this chapter, we really need to look at three distinct areas. First, soteriology. We see human reconciliation functioning here as a beautiful, striking picture of divine grace, and it travels strictly on the rails of humility. God alone prepared Esau's heart for peace, proving that true reconciliation is ultimately a divine gift. Second, hamartiology. The narrative addresses the heavy lifting required to overcome the deep legacy of past sin. Jacob's physical bows answer for his past deceits. You see, sin has real consequences, but grace always provides a path forward. And third, a truly vital point of ecclesiology. We have got to strictly distinguish God's overarching program here. Jacob's definitive movement into Canaan affirms God's earthly, unconditional land promises specifically for national Israel. We must never, ever confuse this with his later distinct program for the New Testament church.
This brings us to a profound, almost startling statement by Jacob. He says, "For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably." Genesis 33:10 NIV. Now we've got to be crystal clear. This does not blur the theological line between the creator and the creature. Jacob is certainly not deifying Esau. Rather, it announces that the God who mercifully spared Jacob's life at Peniel the night before is the exact same God who softened Esau's heart the morning after. A genuinely reconciled human relationship mirrors divine favor in concrete, observable ways. When mercy gets the final word, seeing a forgiven brother's face becomes a visible, tangible sign of God's nearness and his active, intervening grace.
We must rigorously maintain our dispensational distinction as we evaluate how this meeting ends. Peace does not erase distinct biblical callings. The genuine warmth between these twin brothers is an absolutely beautiful model of forgiveness, but it absolutely does not collapse the specific earthly promises given to the line of Abraham. God has a distinct program going on. Esau goes to Edom to become the father of the Edomites. Jacob goes to Canaan to become the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. The narrative masterfully honors both realities at once. You have genuine interpersonal reconciliation on one hand, and the strict, continued unfolding of God's theological program for national Israel on the other. A specific family chosen to possess a specific land, and eventually to bless all the nations of the earth.
So let's connect this real estate purchase to prophecy. Jacob's transaction at Shechem functions as a historical down payment. Abraham purchased Machpelah, now Jacob purchases Shechem. Listen, these are not accidental details. They are concrete, legally binding tokens in the literal soil that God explicitly named to the patriarchs. They are small footholds that point straight forward to a future, literal, prophetic fulfillment for the nation of Israel. When we read this through our dispensational framework, we see it as a taste right now that hints at the grand harvest later. It's a guarantee of the coming messianic kingdom when God's territorial promises to Israel will ripen in ways only He can bring to pass.
Section 4. Spiritual Lessons and Application.
So how does this actually hit the pavement for us? How do we practically apply the truths of this incredible chapter to our daily walk? First, we have to learn to walk toward our own hard meetings with humility and faith. Just like Jacob, we pray fervently, speak as a servant, and trust God to do what human planning simply can't achieve. Second, let your generosity embody your repentance and your peace. Jacob's confession that God has been gracious to me and I have all I need permanently reframes wealth. Hearts that are truly changed by grace use material blessings as a bridge to bless others, not as a wall of pride to protect themselves. And third, mark God's faithfulness with public worship. Just as Jacob built a physical altar at Shechem, we need to anchor our memories by publicly thanking the God who preserves and keeps us.
Here's another really brilliant, highly practical lesson: the concept of prudent peacemaking. Jacob gave generously, and he bowed humbly, but he still politely declined an armed escort and emerged march with Esau's men. He exercised profound wisdom there. He chose a pace that fit his stewardship of fragile lives, his nursing flocks, and his very young children. You see, trusting in God's peace does not forbid careful, prudent travel. Rather, it frees it from the paralysis of fear. As believers, we can learn to set wise, godly boundaries that protect the vulnerable places and people in our care, without ever cooling the warmth of restored love and genuine forgiveness.
Section 5. Conclusion.
As we wrap up, we return to this beautiful hinge point of the text. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Genesis 33:4 NIV. Generosity flowed where deep suspicion once lived. A brother intensely feared became a brother warmly embraced. Genesis 33 is just the magnificent story of a God who answers desperate prayer with profound, restorative peace. He alone softens faces and guides wandering feet into promised places. As we look at Jacob resting safely in Canaan, raising an altar to the God of Israel, we are reminded of the absolute, enduring, and literal nature of God's promises to his chosen people.
May the Lord bless you as you walk in the humility of Jacob, trusting entirely in the God who reconciles the deeply broken and fulfills every single concrete promise he has ever spoken. May he grant you profound peace in your own heart meetings, and may you continually raise altars of gratitude in your heart. Ask yourself today, where do you need to step forward in humility to build a bridge of grace? For more in-depth studies, visit the Grace and Knowledge series blog at woodybrohm.online.